Hi, I'm Monique Diop, Team Rayceen Productions co-host and moderator.
And I'm Krylios, Team Rayceen Productions co-host and moderator.
Joining us is Dr. Shante Paradigm Smalls. Thank you for being here, Shante. Coming to my house.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me, Monique, Krylios, Team Rayceen. I appreciate it.
Of course, it is such a pleasure to have you here, and we want to talk about your book. But before we get into it, please let the viewers know a little bit about your background and experience.
Sure, of course. Hello, everyone out there, viewers, listeners. My name is Dr. Shante Paradigm Smalls. My pronouns are they, them, and I am an associate professor of Black Studies at St. John's University. I'm also a former musician. I had a hip hop group called BQE, had a couple of albums. I've worked in, theater and film, television. Well, not so much television, but theater and film. And I wrote a book called Hip Hop Heresies, Queer Aesthetics in New York City, about Black, queer, and hip hop aesthetics from 1975 to about 2015. So this is a work of love and a lifelong passion project that I ended up, going to graduate school and being able to write about something I love, which is hip hop culture in New York City.
Wonderful.
No, well, you have a wide range in your book. And Doctor, prior to publishing, the scholarly manuscript won the 2016 GLAAD's Fellowship Award for Best Manuscript in LGBT Studies. So come on now, we got to bring that, that
yes.
Thank you.
Please tell me about the book and what motivated you to write it.
Sure. Well, it's so it's always a pleasure to talk about the work with new people and new audiences. The book is really a love letter to, the odd and interesting and sort of weird aesthetics that come out of New York City that I'm calling queer aesthetics that deal with, race, gender, and sexuality through film, music, obviously, and visual art. And then there's a chapter that's really on a history of LGBTQ hip hop. So I write about one of my favorite films, Berry Gordy's The Last Dragon. And, I got to interview Louis Vanessa, who was a screenwriter, and talk to him about some of the background of the film. I write about Jean Grey, who's now retired from making hip hop, but who's still making music and art and other things, other genres. And I wrote about a visual artist named Martin Wong, who was a Chinese American gay man transplant from San Francisco to New York in the late 70s, who really actually helped to facilitate the relationship between graffiti writers like Dondi and Lady Pink and Days and Crash, early, really important graffiti writers, to get into as artists, to get into museums and galleries. And then I have this kind of ethnographic chapter that looks at the long history and also the last decade or so of LGBTQ hip hop artists. So I think about, why gay folks and now, trans folks are so why that produces some kind of volatility, and how that goes seems to crash against the idea of authenticity, the authentic hip hop body, which is usually a masculine, straight Black man. It usually, even though Black women were at the forefront, you wouldn't have hip hop wouldn't be what it is without Black. You wouldn't have had the first hip hop party without Cindy, who was Kool Herc's sister. You wouldn't have had people like Sylvia Rhone and Sylvia Robinson, who made, Sugar Hill Records, and who found all these artists. It's like it's been reduced. And so this book is part of a series of books. There are lots of books out there that's trying to expand our understanding that hip hop coming out of New York City and, of course, different parts of the world is really expansive. And that's not a problem. Doesn't take away from the amazing work of straight Black men, but it shows how this is a broad cultural movement. And particularly now, 2023, if you can believe it, is the 50th anniversary of hip hop, marking that
Wow.
party,
Wow.
right?
Yeah.
Hip hop is going to be 50 years old in August. So there's a whole bunch of events that going on all through the year in New York, and I'm sure other places. There's a exhibit right now up at one of the photography museums that's about women in hip hop. So I'm going to go see that exhibit. So, I'm really excited to be, a little bit of part of that conversation, a little bit part of that, about that history.
That is beautiful. That is so wonderful. And I like how, this book really expands on what we see as what's normal for hip hop, or what hip hop should look like. And something that you pointed out was that not only is it African American, but wider Black. And you touched on Caribbean Blacks. And as someone who is Caribbean, I wanted to know what in your research, did you see where it showed, a lot of the Caribbean influence into hip hop, especially in a place like New York, which is so immigrant focused and has a lot of immigrants from all over. Yeah. And how does that square with the queer aesthetics, where many times,
yes,
from, immigrant places, queer life, queer aesthetics, all of that is looked down upon. However, within hip hop, it is incorporated. To talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of good work out there that came before me about the Caribbean influence, particularly in the innovations around DJing, also around MC in terms of toasting. And, these are diasporic traditions that are shared, but have different flavors, right? So these are African diasporic traditions, but those early DJs, many of them were second generation. So they were going back and forth between, Trinidad, Jamaica, Puerto Rico. They were hearing music also, at parties. They were mixing elements of, they were DJing uptown, in Harlem and the Bronx, and then going downtown, Manhattan to DJ at, weird parties, and going out to Queens and going out to, Brooklyn. So they begin to experiment with sound. So at the time, R&B, funk, disco, of course, major influence on hip hop, even though people try to ignore that because disco is seen as frivolous or feminine, but disco is obviously a very huge influence. We get house music from disco. We get all of those genres from, Black music from disco. And so they're experimenting, putting, soca and bachata and all kinds of this music together, dance hall, and experimenting with sound, with cutting. And so a lot of those innovations in terms of the technological DJ innovations came from Caribbean descended, men, but also a lot of the rappers, had Caribbean roots, people kind of in the second generation, like KRS-One, right? So a lot of these people would, even though they were New Yorkers, an interesting thing about New York is that, when I was growing up, and maybe folks, who are from the New York metro area realize this, we all wanted to be African Americans, we wanted to be Caribbean, so I was always at the Caribbean parties. I was, I knew how to wine, and those parties in the basement where, thank goodness my parents didn't know we were
the fake accent too.
Legs up, right? And my friends are teaching me patois and whatever, and so we're exchanging our cultural references. Also, something I don't talk about so much in this book. But there's a great book by a friend of mine, Regina Bradley, where she talks about the South. And so that relationship between, for instance, I'll just say for myself, we'd go to visit relatives in North Carolina this summer, we'd exchange tapes, things we recorded off the radio. And so you hear those sounds and begin to mix them. And I think one of the things that is really unique about New York City is that it was, because it's a place that values experimentation across genres. People are watching weird movies. They're experimenting with martial arts, with from Chinese martial arts to Brazilian martial arts to African martial arts. They're looking at weird art. They're working with whomever. The rich white people are like, oh, we want to help you out. So there was a lot of hip hop was, and still is at its core, avant-garde, cutting edge. Artwork. And so it was really, people were doing really weird stuff. And it was like nothing, they put so many elements together. It was like nothing anyone's ever heard. So I think a big part, though it is Black, US music culture, its influences are all the influences that are on Black US music culture. And we always look to our relatives and siblings across the diaspora. And we're always listening, for different kinds of things, so that there's not really a sense of purity. The purity is the new, the new invention.
Yeah. The culture in New York is just so different from like DC, especially when it comes to like the street art, the graffiti. You have a section in your book that you talk about the graffiti as well. And I never really put it together how that would come with the hip hop and also to the gay culture. We think about the foot traffic. When I used to drive the subways, you would see the performances. So the culture is just somewhere that everything can just be created almost on a dime. Like, it's just so amazing how hip hop has come, it's changed. I listen to hip hop, go-go, reggae, now Afrobeat, and they all are together. So I definitely love that about that. And reading parts of your book, I saw that all coming together. And I'm like, so this is a conversation that should be happening all over, because it's just really exciting to hear the different aspects of how you came about talking about this book and how it's all coming to fruition.
Yeah, well, so first of all, I'm fascinated. You used to drive subways?
Oh, no, not drive, but just get on them,
Oh, okay. I was like, you a subway driver?
No. When I was a kid, just jumping on them. Yeah,
because that's a job.
Boroughs.
Yes. I think you're right. And when I came to this project through my own personal and artistic experience. So my first memory of hip hop is maybe I was a toddler. It's like 5 years old. This is the story I have. Whether it really happened, I'd have to line the date up. So the story in my head is that my mom was gonna take me to see Dreamgirls.
Oh,
I was playing Cheryl Lee Ralph. I was like,
Loretta Devine.
Love music, love musicals. And I was 5. I don't know why, but I was a singer and all this stuff. So my whole family's very musical. So we were going to see that, and my cousin put on this record, what I remember as Curtis Blow's Basketball. So it was weird, in part because I know there were precursors to that kind of spoken word, but of course I was like a kid. I didn't know about spoken word. You had the Last Poets. You had, you had people like Stevie Wonder doing that kind of stuff. You had Blondie, you had Tina Marie. So people their ears were attuned to that, but I heard it and it was I remember it's so bombastic and so so powerful. And I was like, what is this? And so I also have an older brother. So, my first real introduction to as a part of the culture was I was a little break dancer. I mean, I was terrible, but I had a few moves, you know what I mean? Yes. I had the crab and the worm, and I could pop and lock a little bit. Okay. And I was like, I had the outfit. I had the Pierre Cardin velour outfit. We had the sneakers matching, nameplate, my name really bad, but it was a little kid, was small fry. So fat laces. So immediately fashion, music, eating up the culture, growing up between New York and Connecticut, and really, at that time in New York, we lived in Harlem and Queens, so we were right there. My cousins went to high school with Run DMC. You just knew all these cats, right? And so, I mean, I didn't personally know it, but you see them playing basketball, whatever. You're like, oh, they do something, and later you're like, wait a minute, they're world famous. So, being part of that culture, it was like I absorbed it, and I really have had a lifelong love affair, and sometimes a difficult love affair with hip hop, because of the misogyny and the homophobia and the transphobia. And not to say hip hop and Black people are more homophobic or transphobic or misogynist, but it's more meaningful to me because it's my culture. That's the thing. These are my people. This is my culture. I feel a connection to it. So I'm invested in it. And so it's, we're not making laws, and we're in this country, at least, and in the US, but, hip hop is so powerful, such a powerful emotional and physical tool that, there were times when I really felt defeated and like, why is my culture so, but at the same time, there's always been this little, small voice, of hip hop artists who were LGBTQ, DJs, I talk a little bit about Man Parrish, visual artists. And then of course, in the 90s, the early 90s, you get a whole bunch of Black men and women and trans folks starting to make music as independent artists. The rise of the egalitarian nature, democratic nature of and less expensive of music production. So people started getting midis and 808s, and you could kind of afford it, and so people started playing around, and gay people were like, I grew up in hip hop, so I'm gonna, I'm Black, this is my culture. So I really appreciate that and track some of that. And when I came to graduate school, I had been performing and touring, and then, part of a kind of small movement of LGBTQ artists in the US, Canada, and Europe. And there was a film called Pick Up the Mic that came out in 2005 and premiered at the Toronto Film Festival. And that, I had a little bit of success. I remember having phone calls with HBO. They wanted me to do a reality show, and I said, absolutely not. Sometimes, there was a moment where I thought I was going to make some music for the original L Word. So there were little brushes, but what I realized was that I wanted to learn more about the history and about this. I was like, is this more than just us now? These people I know, these 100, 200 folks I know. And there was, I encountered this group that started making music in the early 80s out of LA, and so that that really blew my mind. And I was like, oh, wait, I'm not just making this up. We're not just making this up. There is a lineage. And so not just of gay people in terms of identity, but artists who were and not just as makeup artists, which is nothing wrong with we know fashion and all that stuff is important, but also as music artists, as engineers, as video directors, as graffiti artists, as dancers. And so, that became, when I was in graduate school, I started writing this dissertation and doing this research, and just found this wellspring of amazing art. And there's another book that came out just recently called, I'm forgetting the name of it, but that's more about, it's by this professor Lauren Kerr, who's out of Western Michigan. He's a musicologist, and she and I know each other, and that book is about more about the long history of gay artists, broadly speaking, in hip hop. And so there's a growing field of interest in this as a subgenre of hip hop studies, as part and parcel of hip hop studies.
Awesome. Well, we're coming down to the end of the interview. So before we get to the wrap up, tell me, what has been your the reaction to your book so far, and what impact do you hope it will have in the future?
I have to say, this is a great question. I was really nervous about, people are really precious about hip hop. And in some ways, I think it's good that I'm a Black person, that knows hip hop really well. I mean, I don't know everything. No one knows everything, but I am deeply invested in hip hop. I researched a lot. I also, a hip hop artist. I talk to a lot of artists, listen to a lot of artists, podcasts, read, listen to the artists themselves. And I think there's been a kind of, people are really curious. I remember I did an interview I had a conversation with Cakes the Killer. I did an interview with him for BBC. America did a show on the future of hip hop in New York and Atlanta and London, I think, where they're looking at Black women as really kind of pushing hip hop forward, and LGBTQ folks as well. And so I was really happy to hear about, the focus on Black women. And it's taken 50 years really for Black women to get some shine, as not just appendages to Black men, but as artists, and not just one artist, Lauryn Hill or Nicki or whoever, but as there's a whole bunch, and so that's been, with television shows and and not as just dancers, but as MCs and DJs and writers and technical, producers. So there's been a lot of, I think when people pick up the book, they're like, oh, okay, this is actually deep into the culture. You're writing about the culture. And it's not just gay. It's about aesthetics. It's about It's about the way that New York City artists, Black aesthetics, hip hop aesthetics, and queer aesthetics manifest themselves through the way people make art, the connections they make, the relationships, right? And how that's so important and produces a signature kind of thing, you know. And now at this point, there are lots of locations that are, this New York isn't, it's the center of hip hop history, but it's not necessarily the center of hip hop anymore in the US. You know, the South has taken over, the West has had, you know, the Midwest. So, but it's just part and parcel. That's great. And so I think there's been a lot of interest from media. I've done interviews with NPR, with BBC, with, you know, y'all, with a lot of different people. People want me to come to their classes, and done book events. So I'm really happy. It's book award season right now, so I'm waiting to see if the book will win any awards. But even if it doesn't, I've been really happy. And I want to just shout out the cover artist, Porky, who's from Baltimore, and he, I found him on the internets, and I was like, I love your art. I have this book coming out on NYU Press. Can I use your art? I've been able to incorporate him with events. He's an amazing artist. Please, you know, support his art. And he was like, absolutely. You know, he was not like any queer guy, but he was like, yeah, this is dope. And I just feel like that's also been a beautiful collaboration and expansion. So the artwork is so important, and it felt like, you know, really incredible. And so it's been a really lovely experience. I feel honored that people want to talk to me about my work, and I'm hoping that in the future that, you know, people just continue to read it and engage it and critique it and disagree with it and add to it, and it sends them down deeper, you know, holes, rabbit holes of knowledge. And that's, you know, that's what it's all about, being part of the conversation. I'm so grateful that I get to be a teeny tiny footnote in the annals of hip hop culture. It's so important to me. So
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, Doctor, please let everybody know how to get a copy of this book. Like, where are you? Where can we see you? Where can we find you? And you know, definitely,
yes.
This is like a history book. It should be taught. Like,
yes,
you cover a lot of things in this book. And
I do.
You do, for real. We talk about race relations, the fluidity of our intergenerations coming together, racial structure.
Yes.
This book covers it all. So yeah, how do we get a hold of it?
Okay, you can go directly to nyupress.org. And if you put in a code SMALLS, my last name SMALLS, 30-FM, you get 30% off. Ooh. And free shipping in the US. Of course, you can just Google it. It's on Bookshop. It's at your you can request it from your local bookstore. It's in Indie Bound. It's on, you know, Barnes and Noble, Amazon. So anywhere books are sold, you can also get it digitally. But this cover is pretty lovely. So it's nice to have the, it's only $21 from the NYU Press with the discount code. So that's pretty good. And it's an easy, you know, it's a pretty, you know, it's a couple hundred pages, but it's I tried to write it in a way that was not too highfalutin, that people could engage it. So yeah, you can get, and you can, I think the slide is going to come, but you can always find me, yes, on my socials, my website. I'm particularly an Instagrammer. IG is where I like to live. And, you know, feel free to reach out to me like y'all did. I love to talk about the work and hear the insights from people who've read it.
Awesome. And viewers, you can look in the description below for links so you can keep up with everything that Shanté has going on. So look in the description for the links. Shanté, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been such a pleasure getting to chat with you, getting to learn more about your book and all the work that you put into it and all the things that makes hip hop, especially in that time to today, and all the things that make it what it is. So thank you so much for joining us today. Such an immense pleasure.
Thank you both all for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you,
Shanté. To those watching, please follow Team Rayceen on social media.
And click around our YouTube channel. Check out our other interviews, blogs, forums, and more. And while you're there, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. And most of all, thank you for watching.